Everyone says Warhammer 40K is ridiculously expensive. Some people think every army costs thousands of pounds. Others will tell you certain factions are impossible to afford. But how true is that, actually? Today, I'm ranking every single Warhammer 40K army from cheapest to the most expensive to collect. So by the end of the video, you'll know exactly which armies give you the best value, and which ones could completely destroy your wallet before you even start the hobby. And I guarantee at least one of those armies are going to surprise you. But as a caveat, these are my opinions. Some armies in some lists, like some weird skew, like the Order to Better Chase or something like that, might be much more expensive. But we're going to address just the general basics today. So we're going to base our ranking system off a few things. First of all, we're going to base it off of what you would buy to build a typical 2,000 point army. We're also going to be basing it off of the recommended retail price. Obviously, these discounts do come into play, but we're also not going to count second-hand purchases or anything like that. And we're going to consider how many kits you realistically need to get this army going. So number one, Adeptus Custodes. So the Custodes are super cool. They've got lots of really elite infantry, and that's the sort of army and the vibe that you go for. Now, recently I did a combat patrol video on every good combat patrol. Spoilers, that was a very good one. Now, the reason why is because obviously this entire army is a subset of elite units and exceptionally powerful, like, individual pieces that cost a lot of points, which make them very effective. Such as they have great combat, a great mix of shooting in there as well, and they're a very elite army with 2-up saves everywhere. But this leads to a few outcomes. The Custodes are pretty cheap to make. Like, I'm pretty sure you could do an entire army, or close to an entire army, with 3 combat patrols and a couple of pieces that you want to buy. Now, this is because, again, they're really expensive units. Like, if you're comparing it to, say, for instance, a £40 box of Space Marines or a £40 box of Custode Guard, the £40 box of Space Marines will do you 2 units of 5 Marines, which is about 160 points, but the £40 box of Custodes could do an entire unit of Wardens, which is over 200 points. For these reasons, they're pretty cheap. So effectively, I'm going to put these guys into S tier. Now, these guys are also a very cool army to build. I've recently had some really cool dreadnoughts as well. I'd definitely recommend go checking them out if this is your vibe. And they are one of the cheaper armies to collect. So let's move on to the next one. Number 2, we have our first Chaos faction of the day. It is the Thousand Sons. So Thousand Sons are interesting because they are a Chaos faction. They seem to have the usual cost setup. As I went through a couple of 2,000 point armies that you've seen recently in recent times. And these guys don't feel too bad. There are a few skew lists that feel a lot more expensive, but again, they're pretty elite. So the Terminators are about £40 a box, and they're quite a lot of points. And you can actually feel a lot of those Terminators in an army, and it'll be very viable and very fun to play. Also, they have the Primarch bonus. Primarch is a lot of points into one model. So it is over £100, but it's worth a lot of points. So when you're trying to build an army, it can, like, you know, bulk up that army quite a lot in a very short space of time. So I can't see these guys being mentally expensive. I've seen a few lists, like I was trying to do the Zangor and the Enlightened and all that sort of thing. Enlightened are quite expensive for what they are, really. It's 3 models for like 70 points or something like that. But don't quote me on that, it's ish. But effectively, these guys, I think, for a 2,000 point army are going to be pretty average. I think they're going to be sitting bang in the middle in terms of price for their armies. So for the reasons above, we're going to put them into B tier. I think they're not a ridiculously expensive army. I think they're not the cheapest army. I think they're very bang in the middle, straight down the road. And without further ado, let's move on to the next one. Number 3, Astra Militarum. So these guys are so cool. However, they have issues. So in terms of the price. Cadians are £32.50 a box. That unit will give you 65 points worth of guardsmen. So you can see the issue here. So effectively, you're like £10 off a unit of Wardens, and they are a third of the price. So that means if you wanted to build up in the same scale as, say, for instance, Cadian shock troops, then you're looking at 3 times the cost. Now, obviously, you're not just going to build guardsmen, you're going to build other things as well. But the guardsmen do have a problem in the fact that a lot of their stuff all cost a lot of money, but don't cost many points. So across the board, like, I've been looking at 2,000 point lists that people have been using, like Recon, Grizzle Company, and all that sort of thing. And all of them seem to be exceptionally expensive for you know, a 2,000 point army. And I've tried to find ways to make it cheaper. Like if you want to go for pure tanks or, you know, something along those flavors. And there are ways to make this cheaper for yourself. So it's not like doom and gloom, but it is quite an expensive army all in all. That being said, they are pretty damn cool. They are the heroes of the Imperium. They're going to run around and die like cannon fodder, and the next wave will come in. I think their average like survival rate on a planet is like, I think at one point it was like 3 minutes or something like that, or even less. I think those is really cool, but we're going to sit into D tier for their cost. If you're expecting to spend like £400 or £500 on an army as a beginner, and you pick up guard and you want 2,000 points, you're probably not going to be spending that. You'll be spending within the region of about 700 to 900, depending on the list that you wanted to do. So without further ado, let's move on to the next one. Number 4, Aeldari. They're awesome. They're my babies. I love those guys. And in terms of price, individually, these units look exceptionally expensive, right? But especially in 11th edition, you seem to have basically lost a unit from points increases. Now, that could be a bonus or a negative depending on where you sit in the hobby. Someone who wants to go for best painted and just spends a bit more time in their army, this is a bonus. You have less things to paint up to an exceptional standard, so you can just take them to wherever you want to go. However, from a purchasing perspective, it's also better as well, because it means you have to buy less stuff to make a 2,000 point army, especially as a beginner. It's like Lycus. Lycus is a £29.50 model, and she's 135 points. That's pretty good in terms of, you know, the price per point. She's obviously very expensive in game, but in terms of building an army as a beginner, this is a fantastic bonus. Also, like Warp Spiders now are 115 points. They're like £30 a box for an average unit of Aspect Warriors. And yeah, so I think there's a lot of ways here to try and trim the cost down. However, I do think there are some pricey aspects to this. Also, Rangers. Rangers are 60 points a unit. They are pretty cool. And they're a really useful piece in game. They get to go out and do actions and all that sort of thing, and they're really useful for most people in an for most Eldar armies. However, they are £40 for a box of 5. So they are very expensive. But that doesn't mean that they're not a cool unit. They're also very nice models as well. Like the new Ranger models are one of the best things they did. The old Finecast ones, oh my god. But yeah, so I do think there are aspects of this army that are going to make this quite expensive. And also, you're paying a lot of money for old sculpts as well, like the Falcon and the Wave Serpent Classics. They look great, but they are old. So in terms of where they sit, I'm going to put them into C tier. They are pretty expensive if you go for like a general basic list, but I'm going to add a caveat here that you can purchase this on the cheap. Like, if you wanted to really aggressively buy points for money, you could. So, without further ado, let's move on to the next one. Number 5, Grey Knights. I do love my Grey Knights. Grey Knights are in a unique spot in a similar way to the Custodes, not quite as efficient as the Custodes, but they're a really high points value for not many of them. And also, they also get a big bonus in the fact that their boxes come in boxes of 10. Now, they cost a little bit more because it's a box of 10, but they're still a box of 10 for £42.50, which is pretty good. Because that £42.50 can make you 10 Purifiers, 10 Interceptors, 10 Strike Squads, and all that sort of thing. The minimum this goes to is 120 points. The maximum this goes to is 250, depending if you have your third unit of stuff in 11th edition. However, this is a pretty efficient use of points. So if you want to just build an army out of Marines, you could buy 7 boxes of these Marines, which is £294.50, I think, something along those lines. But effectively, you could buy these things and then, you know, have an entire army. Now, the Grey Knights also have lots of really cool rules. They've recently had a few 1DP detachments in 11th edition, which are also really fun. But I think these guys are going to be really cheap to make. So I'm going to put this into solidly S tier, super cheap, love them, and we'll move on to the next one. Okay, next we're going to go on to Tyranids. Tyranids, I think, are an interesting one. Tyranids are a faction where you can, if you buy 300 gaunts, this army is going to be exceptionally expensive. No doubts about it. And I think there's lots of reasons why this army could become expensive overall, but I think there's so many ways that you can get this army quite cheaply, like weaponizing combat patrol starter sets, the combat patrol sets at the moment. There's lots of stuff in there and lots of points. Like, if you found a Space Marine guy, you could both buy a box, swap, and you both basically have 1,200 points. Like, there's quite a lot of stuff in those Combat Patrol starter sets. Like, not the Tyranid Combat Patrol, by the way. There's starter sets overall with the Marines and the Tyranids. There's a lot of stuff in there that you can definitely use, and it's quite cheap because of all the push-foot stuff, right? So I think that's a really good basis for an army. Then you can build on top of it like a buy a Norn, buy some Hormigants, buy some Genestealers, all that sort of thing. So I would say these guys aren't mentally expensive, to be honest. I bought 1,000 points, and I got like, you know, Leviathan kits. Obviously, Leviathan is going soon, so I might have to readdress this when Leviathan is gone, because Armageddon is going to replace it. But I do think that the Tyranids overall, you can get into pretty well. I do think they're a good beginner army as well, in terms of beginner friendliness, which I quite like. So I'm going to put these guys into A tier, because I do think there's a lot of value for the money in these boxes as well. They're famously iconic kits that look fantastic. They they're not mentally expensive. They're going to be cheaper than a lot of the C tiers, I think. So I'm going to put the Tyranids into A tier. Again, under the proviso that I might have to change this when I readdress it at some stage. And we're going to move on to the next one. Number 7, Imperial Knights. Imperial Knights the kits are exceptionally expensive, right? But there's not many of them. Like you basically run 4 or 5 knights with some stuff. So you could take some, like, you know, some allies, an assassin, all that sort of thing, which are all super cool. And I do think this army is pretty cheap. Imperial Knights have a unique ability in the fact that for someone who's just starting the army, you can simply pick up just pick up the knights that you want, and you've got the army. It's a very unique position to be in, and it's super cool. So for the reasons I've said above, I'm going to put these into A tier. I think they're pretty good value for money. I think you don't have to buy many knights. I think they're pretty cheap. So without further ado, let's move on to the next one. So, World Eaters, our second Chaos faction of the day. Where would they sit? I think they've got a lot of value for money in a lot of their boxes. I think 8-bound are very expensive in points, so therefore, in terms of points for money, they're also very good value. I think Berserkers also get quite pricey as well, and also that box is beautifully good. It's the new Berserker box is so good. And there's lots of really cool characters that also cost quite a few points as well, which can also bulk out the points as well. So in terms of trying to get an army started for these guys, it's very, very entry-level-y good, but also it does get expensive when you add it all together. Like, Angron is expensive and not an incredibly high amount of points. You have stuff like kill teams like Goremongers and all that sort of thing to add into your list if you wanted to make a very balanced approach, which also costs a lot of money. And, you know, across a lot of it, you'll see it go up slightly, but it's not mentally bad. So I'm going to put these into B tier. So I think they're just averagely priced. I don't think they're unreasonable. I don't think they're crazy good value. I think they're just very solid and sit in between. So without further ado, let's move on to the next one. So the Drukhari. The Drukhari are also in a very interesting spot. They have a very old range of miniatures that are also very expensive. Like if you compare the Cabalite Warriors that we get now to the price when they first came out, it's crazy. Inflation, hey. Oof. However, this also leads to a lot of problems in terms of their price. So it's an army of cheap units that cost similar to armies that have expensive units, but you have more of them. So you need basically like 2 or 3 Venoms, 2 Raiders, a few Ravagers, some Scourges, some Witches, and all that sort of thing, and a nice balanced approach to the list. When you add all this together, it is a lot of money because all of these units are pretty damn cheap. So I always say, as a general rule of thumb, if you're taking an army which has a lot of units that are cheap, it's probably going to be more expensive. It's not necessarily true every single time, but I would be pretty confident in saying 99% of the time, if you're looking at building an army with a lot of stuff, like the 300, like an entire gaunt swarm or loads of MSU from Drukhari and all that sort of thing, I think you are going to find that it's going to get quite expensive. That being said, the models are still great. They're old, but they're timeless. They look fantastic. And there's also a lot of really new cool models that came out. Like they've got the new Archon, they've got the new Lady Malice, and you've got the classic miniatures like Drazar as well, which is just awesome. So in terms of value, I am going to put these into C tier. They are pretty expensive, but they are very cool. I love Drukhari, but they are pretty expensive, just as a warning. So let's move on to the next one. Number 10, Sisters. You know, I was just saying that armies with a lot of units are quite expensive. Sisters are exceptionally expensive. Sisters have a similar issue, except they have more of the same issue. They have more units. They have tanks that cost quite a bit of money. They're all pretty aggressively priced, so they're all pretty cheap. And overall, this army just cost quite a lot across the board. However, they are awesome. They do have a lot of, I would also say, they have a lot of value for money just in the fact that their kits have so much detail. And if that's something you wanted to do and get into and really paint every single little detail on there, you are going to love these miniatures. But if you're looking to get 2,000 points, it is going to be expensive. But the reward is also very great as well, because I've done Sisters before and they're fantastic miniatures. So that being said, I'm going to put them into D tier. They are one of the most expensive factions in the game. I'd be pretty confident in saying. So, and without further ado, we're going to move on to the next one. So Agents of the Imperium. So Agents of the Imperium have had a lot of battle forces throughout time that are exceptionally good value for money that you can build up armies with. Obviously, a lot of them are limited runs, so you're not going to see them much anymore. But stuff like their combat patrol right now is really good value for money. And you can get a lot of stuff from that, and you can just basically spam it. It's troop choices in characters, and you can convert the one assassin in there to be other stuff. So you can convert that to be another assassin and all that sort of thing. So you can basically spam this box a couple of times, which is pretty cool. And it's an army of trash though, but you can also take a lot of characters, which is what you want to do with agents anyway. They're assassins. So you can basically get a lot of characters that cost a decent amount of points that also add up to the amount that you want to do. Also, you have Grey Knights there. You have Grey Knight Terminators you can add into there as well, which is super cool. And they're pretty expensive and pretty cheap. So overall, I don't think they're bad at all. I'm not going to put them into S tier because I don't know enough about them that way, but I know that they're pretty cheap. So I'm going to put them into A tier because I think they're pretty solid. I don't think this is going to be a ridiculously expensive entry-level army for a beginner to go into, but we're going to put it into A tier, and then we're going to move on to the next one. Next is Death Guard. Death Guard are awesome. So their combat patrol is pretty cheap. However, outside of the combat patrol, it gets a little bit more pricey. Not impossibly pricey, but a little bit more pricey. So I think you've got stuff like drones, which can get quite expensive. You've got a lot of like Poxwalker units, which are cheap and a lot of money. And these things add up over time. And it doesn't make them ridiculously expensive by any stretch of the imagination. It makes them relatively reasonable. Like, I think it just makes them bang average. But, you know, I think if you added stuff like, even Mortarion is not actually that many points for the money he is, because he's pretty cheap. So I think all of these things contribute together to make this faction pretty bang in the middle for price. But I think the Combat Patrol pushes this over the edge, because you can spam that box 3 times and get close to 1,200 points, which is awesome. And that's with converting a couple of the pieces in there to other units, making the character into something else and all that sort of thing. And because I have those units in there that are super cool, they look super flavorful, and, you know, I really like this Combat Patrol. It's ranked really highly in the Combat Patrol video I did the other day because it's a great box. So I think this does push it up a bit, especially for a beginner. Being able to just buy 3 Combat Patrols if you wanted to do this army, and having a very solid basis to an army, is a great utility to have, and it's a lot of cost saving there as well. So the reasons I've said above, I'm going to put them into A tier. I think they're pretty fantastic. I don't think they're like exceptionally cheap, but I think that the Combat Patrol does push them over the edge a bit. Now, I know that there's a few units in there that are expensive, and I think if you look at specific Death Guard builds, like tournament lists and all that sort of thing, you are going to find that this might get a little bit more expensive. But for a beginner starting out who just wants miniatures and gets started with these guys, I do think they're a pretty reasonable army to start with, based off of the Combat Patrol and other deals you can get. So without further ado, let's move on to the next one. Orks. So, the Crumpin' Boys, the big men. I think that they are exceptionally expensive, unfortunately. However, if you get the Armageddon box, this might change it a little bit. Now, the Armageddon box, I believe, is sold still on the GW website, which is pretty fun. They have a lot in the context. If you want to find out the contents of it, I'd go have a look. I can do a breakdown of that if you want that. If you want that video, let me know in the comments. But ultimately, they are quite an expensive army overall, because again, they're quite cheap. There's lots of units to buy, and the units aren't cheap because they're newer kits, which is fine because the kits look great, but it does make them more expensive from a cost analysis perspective. So I would say these guys, I don't think there's a way to make them exceptionally cheap either. I think if you're going to buy a 2,000 point Orc army, it's going to be expensive, and that's unfortunately just a fact of the matter. So I'm unfortunately, with a heavy heart, have to put the Crumpin' Boys into D tier in terms of, you know, cost. They're an exceptionally pricey army to get into. Collectors get into them. Orc players are very dedicated to their army. So bear that in mind. So yeah, I'm going to put them into D tier for the cost, and then we'll move on. Chaos Demons. Chaos Demons, I'm sort of looking at it from a perspective of a similar way to Knights, in the fact that you can go for big demons and just get a load of them, or if you go for small demons and go for a load of them. But the prices sort of line up similar, except the small demons do get a little bit more expensive. If you're looking at demons from a purely objective point of view, and you're just looking at a balanced approach with a few big demons and some infantry and some beasts and all that sort of thing, it's not unreasonable. It's not crazy expensive. It's not crazy cheap. I feel like this army, it's just priced like a Warhammer 40K army. It feels really reasonable. So, you know, I think there are ways to make this cheaper, and there are ways to make this more expensive. But I would say, as an average approach, these guys are definitely going to sit in the middle B tier. I think they're very solid. I don't think they're mentally expensive. I think they're pretty cool. And yeah, I don't see a reason why not to put these guys into B tier. Let me know in the comments if you think they shouldn't be. But without further ado, let's move on to the next one. Number 15 is the Leagues of Votann. Leagues of Votann are, I have had a look at a few armies of Leagues of Votann and had a look at the combat patrol and what people use. I've had a look at lists that people use and had a look at the cost of those. These guys feel quite expensive. I don't think they're mentally expensive. Like, I wouldn't say that they're like, you know, sisters level of expense. I think they're, at least I've been looking at, they look a smidge more expensive than most other armies. Not by much, but by just enough. So, you know, for those reasons, I think I'm going to put these guys into C tier for pretty expensive. But as a caveat, this doesn't mean that they're not viable. I think there are ways to make this cheaper as well. I just might not know it. Like, the combat patrol is also pretty decent as well, so there is that. But I'm going to put these guys into C tier because I think that they are just slightly more expensive than the average Warhammer 40k army. And without further ado, let's move on to the next one. So next we move on to the Emperor's Children. So, well, the Emperor's Children are pretty cool in a few ways. The combat patrol is pretty decent value. You get a good amount of units in there and all that sort of thing. However, the army overall, I would say, is slightly more expensive than the other Chaos factions we've been seeing. And I don't know why. I think it's because it's just new kits, so they're slightly more expensive. But it looks as if I basically put the army into, I basically just use the Warhammer web store and just put it all in there and see what it looks like. And like the Flawless Blades are expensive, and you've got Fulgrim is expensive. Again, lovely miniatures, one of my favorite ranges in all of Warhammer 40k. And I have bought them all at some stage. But in terms of price, I think this is with a heavy heart I put them into C tier here, because I'm gonna put them into C tier. But I think that there's definitely ways to make this cheaper. I think that the army itself, if you spam combat patrols and just buy 3 of them, this could easily just sit into B tier. It's an averagely costed army then, if you like those units. So I will say that if you weaponize the combat patrol, easily B tier, and then it's like fine. But I'm gonna have to put into C tier just in case people don't like those units in the combat patrol. But I'm gonna say C tier. And without further ado, let's move on to the next one. Number 17, Adeptus Mechanicus. Adeptus Mechanicus are pretty rad, all right? Forgive the pun. They have lots of really cool, intricate little models that have some really weird mechanical devices, which are pretty cool. However, they're an army of cheap units. What did I say earlier? It makes them exceptionally expensive. So this army, more than most as well, is that it's like £40 for a box of Skystalkers, and they're 70 points. And that is the same for most of the units. Like, you know, if you look at it across, you know, a 2,000 point army, and you just wanted to have a normal AdMech army with some shooting, some scoring, and all that sort of thing, you're going to have a lot of money spent. Like, as a joke made by Jack Tite, one of my mates on, one of my teammates on Team England as well, he said his retirement plan is his AdMech army. The AdMech are crazy. The AdMech are crazy expensive. That being said, beautiful miniatures, but they are a labor of love. So I'm going to put these guys into D tier for super expensive because, god damn, they're super expensive, but super cool at the same time. So let's move on to the next one. Number 18, Space Marines. Space Marines are rarely in a place that they're not good value, because they make them good value, quite intentionally. So stuff like Terminators are they're really high value in points, and they can be added into armies. Like units like all of their Marine units are 10-man Marine units that you can then double up into 5-mans, which also add you more points as well. Like, this army is designed to be beginner friendly because they're the poster children of the entire game. So Armageddon boxes out, and that has a lot of value for money as well. Like, they've got, if you wanted to find someone, an Orc player who wanted to buy an Orc half and a Space Marine player who wants to buy a Space Marine half, and they swap over, that'd be pretty cool, because then you both have close to near enough an army anyway, and that's great value for these starter sets. A lot of people buy a box and then swap with someone else, or just buy a box and split it, etc. So Space Marine's always going to be good value for money. So these guys are going to sit into S tier. Unfortunately, I know I am a Space Marine enjoyer. I might be biased on this one, but I really do think that Space Marines aren't a ridiculously expensive army at all. I think there's a lot of ways to make it cheaper as well. The combat patrols are always going to be good value. Armageddon's coming up. It's a great time to be a Space Marine player. So without further ado, let's move on to the next one. Genestealer Cults. So a while ago in my Combat Patrol challenge, I spoke about Genestealer Cults Combat Patrol and the fact that they're a little bit expensive, and there's not many points in this box, and I stand by it. Again, it's an army of cheap units that cost a lot of money. It's going to be an expensive army. Like, you're looking at in the region of over 100 models for an average list. If you want to take all the rock grinders and that sort of thing as well, they're also quite expensive for the price of their points and all that sort of thing. So I would, if you're going to get into them, be warned, these guys are very expensive. And they're very cool models though. I've painted 2 GSC armies myself. They're fantastic. But I'm just not, I can't see them ever being cheap. I can't find a way to make them cheap either. The Combat Patrol has barely any points in it. The old Combat Patrol was better with the Icon Ward in there and all that sort of thing. That was a really cool box with the Ridge Runner Icon Ward and some dudes. That was a very spammable box. People could buy 8 of them. You couldn't use 8 of the characters, but the actual value of the box meant the character was more than free, so you could just spam those boxes. But the new one doesn't work as well with the Jackals and the Jackal Alphas and all that sort of thing. So I'm going to put these guys subtly into D tier because, you know, they're very expensive. I keep, like, you know, putting GSC lists into, you know, Warhammer Store and seeing how expensive they are. And it's a lot of money. So be warned. So yeah, that's that one. And we're going to move on to the next one. Number 20, Tau. So Tau. This is the one that I think is going to surprise some people, or not surprise some people if they are Tau players. So I went in with the expectation of this army before I did some research. This was going to be pretty cheap. It's Tau, right? So yeah, I remember a time that when I first started 40k and I bought some Tau, and it was basically, I had an entire army for like 200 quid. So I didn't go in with the expectation of this to be that expensive. Mainly because it was battle suits. Battle suits are really cheap, suits are really cheap and all that sort of thing, which is, you know, super cool. So I thought this would be exceptionally reasonable. It was not. If you try and do a recruit army, you're looking at well in the region of like 800 quid. If you try and do a normal Tau army, which is why I priced up the other day, it's well within the region of 780 quid. And I just kept doing this. I just kept putting in Tau armies that I thought were reasonable. And I was like, that's a cool Tau list. Let's see how much that costs and all that sort of thing. And every single time, it was ridiculously expensive. So Tau goes straight into D tier. I cannot find a reason to make them go higher than that. They are so expensive, but they're also very, very cool. And I love Tau, and a lot of people do as well, which, you know, they are very, very cool. They are Gundam robots. But without further ado, let's move on to the next one. Number 21 is Chaos Space Marines. So Chaos Space Marines, they are they're another subject of pretty damn good battle forces / combat patrols / bargain boxes and all that sort of thing. They always seem to have something going on for them, which is pretty cool. So I would say that CSM are going to sit solidly in B tier. Now, a few people are going to tell me that I'm mad for this, but I really do think there's a lot of ways to make this quite cheap. Like every single Christmas, there is a Christmas box. The combat patrols are always very good. And also they just randomly release box sets. Like the Huron box set is also really good value for money and all that sort of thing. So I think there's lots of ways to do CSM quite cheaply. Also, there's stuff like the Obliterators and Venom Crawler. That box is cheap and it's worth about 300 points, which is awesome. So yeah, for those reasons, I am going to put them into the middle, B tier, because I think they're fantastic. And also, they're my boys. And much love to the Night Lords. So let's move on to the next one. So Necrons. Necrons are pretty interesting in a sense. I thought they were going to be exceptionally expensive, and they are a little bit expensive, a little bit. But they have really, really cool centerpiece models that are also quite a lot of points. So that means that it's similar to a Knight's effect, but not quite to the same level, but still very similar in terms of price. I kept pricing up the list. It's about the same as a Knight army, to be honest. So Necrons, I am going to put into A tier. Because I think they're a bit better than average. Like, I think compared to the list that I was trying to price up earlier, I think this was sitting nicely in the region, like, you know, just below an average army costing, which is pretty cool. So Necrons can sit into A tier. Congratulations, Necrons. If you disagree with me, let me know in the comments. But I think that one is pretty solidly there. And without further ado, let's move on to the last faction. Last one is Chaos Knights. This is a very similar vein to the Imperial Knights, so I'm going to just leave this. I'm going to just gloss over this one a little bit. It's one of those things where you buy 4 or 5 kits and your army's done. Or you've got to buy lots of war dogs and that sort of thing, which again is totally viable and totally fine. But ultimately, I think that this faction is pretty cheap. Also, it's chaos, so, you know, it's fun. So these guys are going to go into A tier for good value. I think there's a lot of value for money in this army, and I think it's going to be one of the cheaper armies you can do. And that is our tier. Let's take a screenshot now, then we'll show it to your friends for later. Guys, thank you for watching to the end of the video. If you've got to this far, please do drop a like and subscribe. We have been growing at an awesome rate so far. It's been crazy. We've got 615s at the point of this video, at the point of recording, and we just keep growing, which is awesome. And I really appreciate that, because I didn't expect it to go this well, this off the bat, which is super cool. You guys have been absolutely lovely in the comments as well. You've been giving me some really good advice on the mic setups and all that sort of thing. Next one is lighting, so that's gonna be my next job. But yeah, so I really appreciate you guys. I will see you in the next video. Much love, and bye-bye.